Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the September 20th Educational Affairs meeting. We will take a roll call now. Mr. Schultz.
Present.
Mr. Epps, I'm going in order. Mr. Fishbein.
Present.
Mr. Burdell-Williams.
Present.
Ms. Lohman. Present. Ms. Haywood.
Present.
Mr. Cohen.
Present.
And Leah Mulhern, also present. We have approval of the minutes from the June 2022 meeting, the last meeting of the last academic year. If I could have a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Zachary. Oh.
That's right.
No, Zachary Epps.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. The motion carries. We will now move to our agenda for this evening. This evening we have two topics on the agenda, two presentations. I believe Dr. Smith will go first with the presentation. It is an overview of the 2022-23 Educational Affairs Committee agenda. So it will lay out kind of the plans for the committee for the entire year. Dr. Smith will speak more to this, I'm sure, but the idea here is that if more people know, more community members know about the meetings and what the meetings will contain, people can come when they so choose when it's a topic that's of priority to them. And then the second presentation will be Mr. Pimentel, and it will be a presentation on professional development on a bi-monthly early dismissal schedule. So we will start with Dr. Smith.
Good evening, everyone.
Good
evening.
Tonight's Educational Affairs Committee meeting, as Ms. Mulhern stated, is to give everyone a general overview month by month of the topics that we will be covering from September until June. And not only does having this information in advance allow everyone the opportunity to attend the meetings and make plans to attend the meetings, but also is a reminder that if you can't attend the meeting, to go to our website to look for the copy of the recording. And with that, I'll start, as we always start with our presentations, revisiting our mission statement as well as revisiting our vision statement to kind of center us and remind us that the work that we do here in the district should all come back to our current vision and mission.
Doc, just so you're aware, I don't know if you're trying to project, but if you are, it's not showing yet.
Okay, let me go back. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
That worked.
Yep.
My apologies. So again, we're centered around our vision and our mission statement. And the following presentation reflects our agenda for the year. I do want to give a disclaimer that as topics may come up or things may arise, this agenda may be modified. And when I say modified, we will add to topics. We will not subtract, but there may come an opportunity or come a time where we may need to add something additional to the agenda than what you see here this evening. And so just as a reminder for our current families and an introduction to our new families, these meetings are organized and hosted by the Office of Education. Various members of the Office of Education present based on topic, and the School Board of Directors committee chairs for this particular committee are Ms. Julie Haywood and also Ms. Leah Mulhern. And to get us started, tonight's meeting, our September meeting, is around bi-monthly early dismissal professional learning days. I will not take away from Mr. Pimentel's presentation tonight by going into much into depth, but this is a proposal to our School Board of Directors and specifically to our superintendent to consider a every other Wednesday early dismissal in order to give our staff additional time for training, workshop, and other professional learning experiences. One of the things that we learned and acquired during the pandemic times is that additional PD that our staff and our teachers received was very much appreciated. So we're trying to get back as much of that time as possible. For October, the topic will be school improvement plans facilitated by our building principals and also supported by the Office of Education. Our administrators, they will share their school improvement plans, things that they have been specifically looking at to improve in their schools. Those particular plans will look different by school because data-driven. There will be action steps that are taken based on the data. And it is basically an opportunity for our principals to share with our community the baseline of where they're starting this year, what their expectations are for the year. And then the expectation is at the end of the year that our building principals will come back to us later and give us an update on the outcomes. November's topic, gifted education, led again by Mr. Pimental. Our target audience is our community members with school-aged children who may have children who qualify for gifted, or they may want to have tested for gifted, or they just may want to hear more information about our gifted programs and assessments, instruction, and what the designation of gifted, what it is and what it is not. For December, December's topic will be all around future school calendars. We need to propose a 23-24 school calendar as well as a 24-25 school calendar. We will be taking under advisement some of the recommendations we received from our calendar committee. The calendar committee will reconvene again to discuss some of the proposals. We will make that proposal to the school board of directors at the December meeting so that we can have those calendars approved and put out to the public so that our families and community members can plan accordingly around the school calendars. Also in December, a second title, and this presentation revolves around our board policy that directs us to make these course recommendations in time for appropriate and timely approval. This will be facilitated by Dr. Ben Hammond, our CHS, one of our CHS vice principals, and our target audience for CHS course recommendations are Cedarbrook families and Cheltenham High School families to have an idea of new courses that are being recommended, what the prerequisites are for those courses, how those courses lend themselves to graduation requirements, so on and so forth. Third presentation, so December will be a relatively longer meeting. Third presentation is our ATSI plan update. And during this update, we will hear about CHS's ATSI program. ATSI stands for Additional Targeted Support and Improvement Plan. We were added to this list of schools being identified as being on the ATSI plan during the 2017 and 2018 school year. During this presentation, we will hear more information from Ms. Collins, our Director of Secondary Education, and Mr. DeAndrea, our CHS principal, about the growth we've made on this plan, the requirements we've accomplished during this plan, and what the exit strategy and exit requirements are so that we are no longer designated as an ATSI school. And now we're into January. January's presentation will be led by Ms. Jessica Keene, our Director of Student Services. The topic is social emotional learning supports for students' health, safety, and wellness. As we all know, this has always been an important topic, but it has really moved somewhat to the front of the line as a result of all the changes and things that our children and our communities have experienced during the recent pandemic. Even though we're coming down to the end, we are still seeing some of the lasting impacts, some of the lasting effects. So Ms. Keene will give us a review of what the district is offering, how we're supporting staff, how we're supporting students with staffing, resources, and programming in order to address social emotional learning and social emotional supports. February, the topic is our autistic support classroom transition. As some of you may know, and for those who are new to the district or new to tonight's Ed Affairs presentation and did not have an opportunity to hear us speak on this last school year, we have brought back a significant portion of our autistic support students who receive autistic support from our IU. And the motivation for that move was to really continue to include our children who are Cheltenham residents as much as possible in our educational program. And we felt that while the classes were ran by the IU, our children were included, they were in our buildings. We wanted to make sure that as much as possible, we were able to take direct ownership for our students who are receiving autistic support. So you will hear an update from Dr. Gallagher and also Ms. D. That is what she's asked us to call her because apparently her last name is hard to pronounce, but I am committed to learning to pronounce her. September 30th, I will say Ms. D. The next time I'm before you, I will be able to phonetically pronounce her name correctly because it is important. I believe names are important in making sure that we call people by their given name. So for tonight, I am going to gracefully accept the offer to call her Ms. D, but Ms. D and Dr. Gallagher, they will present updates, next steps on what is happening in our autistic support classroom and how that transition has gone. In March, we will have Mr. Pimentel and Dr. Riley before us to give us an update on basically our K-4 makerspaces, STEM, and project learning that has been coming out of the Office of Innovation. And we want to make sure that the community and that our board members, our superintendent, our parents get to see that this is not standalone initiatives, but this is something that we're expecting our children to come into the district in kindergarten to foster their love for STEM, to start to foster their excitement, their aptitude for some of our STEM courses very early. We know that with self-fulfilling prophecy, we have told certain genders, we have told certain children, you know, this area is for these types of kids, or science is only for this particular group. And so we're starting very young to really make sure that everyone feels welcome in the STEM world as we grow them and also nurture them during their time in the Cheltenham School District. So this is a true K-12 initiative that starts with our youngest citizens, and it doesn't end until we're in high school. Mr. Pimentel and Dr. Riley will update us on what's happening in classrooms, what specific programs we're working with, any additional funding that is associated with these programs, and also any new resources that are being explored to strengthen our STEM commitment in the Cheltenham School District. In April, it is time for myself and also Ms. Collins to present our long-coming homework policy. We are going to present the homework policy here at the Educational Affairs meeting, with the next steps being to present the policy at the policy meeting to get things rolling so that this becomes an approved policy in our district. The homework policy is kindergarten through 12. And just as a reminder and a new introduction to anyone who is new to the district, the homework policy has been worked on by the Office of Education. We've received feedback from teachers, we've received feedback from parents, and we've also received feedback from students. So this is a true community-based, community-powered policy. And I'm sure as you can appreciate, as with any policy and with any negotiations, there are some things that people are going to absolutely love, and they're going to be parts of the policy that people may not absolutely agree with. But we do want to put it out there that this was a collective effort, a coordinated effort. This was over a year process. We really took our time to dig deep so that we came out with something that we all felt comfortable with putting in front of our children, our families, and also our teachers. In May, our principals will be before us again to give us updates on their school improvement plans, to share their outcomes, to share feedback, to share lessons learned, to share excitement, to share wins, and to also talk about, now that the year is coming to a close in May, what will the year look like in terms of continuing to move the district in the right direction. And last but not least, we will come before you in June to give a comprehensive review of the school year. I will work closely, as always, with Superintendent Scriven to determine, in addition to any educational items, any non-educational, non-directly educational, because everything we do impacts education, but anything more so from our operations side that we may include in this comprehensive review of the school year while we have a captive audience. And just last statement I want to share, all educational meetings are open to the public, all of them. Even though each slide designates a targeted audience, that designation is specifically to give people a recommendation as to which meetings we believe would be beneficial. However, everyone is invited to all of our meetings, and all of our meetings will be posted to the website by Mr. Kaufman at the conclusion of the meetings. And with that, I am done, and I will stop sharing my screen and take any questions that may come up at this time.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Do we have any board member questions at this time? Ms. Haywood?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Smith, and thank you also for putting the agendas out for the year. This is the first time we've done that, and I think it's going to be really helpful to really publicize for the community what topics we're going to be talking about, so they can maybe plan accordingly and attend some of the meetings. As it relates to the last agenda topic for June, the 22-23 year in review, I know that when we had our pre-meeting, you talked about some integration of the strategic plan in that presentation as well. I just wanted to confirm that.
Yes, that is correct. And also anything else that Superintendent Scriven believes needs to be shared during this presentation for the benefit of the community as we do a year in review. So yes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And my second question is related to the both the school improvement plan updates, which I really appreciated that we're getting those twice during the year. And I noticed that we have a gifted education agenda topic. Are we going to separately have a special education agenda topic, or will it be incorporated into the ATIS or some other agenda topic that's being presented?
So that's a very good question. And yes, we will revisit and have an update on special education. We were trying to figure out when the best time would be to do so. So we did not add it to the agenda at this time, because we're looking at some of the deliverables that Dr. Gallagher and her office has, and to align some of those deliverables to when we come before you, because we don't want to have a presentation and there's some active items that we need to close the loop on before we present. So yes, that is, we are aware that it wouldn't be a part of the ATSI presentation that's specific to Cheltenham High School, but we will have something where Dr. Gallagher gives us an update. It's just not captured here because with the autistic support presentation and the ATSI presentation, we wanted to make sure that we found a good fit and a good time to incorporate that agenda topic.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that. I know you said we'll supplement the agendas as needed.
Yes.
And so we'll get that information out to the public in a timely manner. And I think that's going to be a topic that a lot of people may be interested in as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haywood. Mr. Cohen?
Yes, thank you. So in addition to our communications that we do generally about meetings, which I assume would occur for these meetings, where there are targeted audiences, where we have email lists, for example, can we do targeted outreach to those groups and members of the community so that they're aware of those meetings where, again, it might be more of a focus for their interest?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part. Can you repeat your question or statement?
I'm sorry, where there's target audiences, if we, for example, high school and Cedar Brook community for the parents, if we have email lists for those groups, can we do targeted outreach for those meetings where they're the targeted audience?
That's a very good suggestion. Yes, I'll pass that along to Mr. Kaufman as well as our building principal. That's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Mr. Schultz?
First, this is great and inspiring. Maybe someday we'll get the finance committee to be able to do something like this. Although it probably would be budget. Anyway, my only question was around the autistic support classroom transition, which I'm glad there will be a whole day for that. However, it is also quite a ways away, and that is a major transition that we just went through. And we know it's also a sensitive community. Would it be appropriate to have a smaller update sooner to now, since we're to sort of make sure that we are on track and hitting our goals for that subgroup of communities?
Yeah, I'll definitely connect with Dr. Smith and Dr. Gallagher and see how we can finesse giving an update sooner than February around how the transition is going.
Thank you.
So what I was going to add is, while there may not be a full presentation, we absolutely will use our biweekly board updates to keep updated on what's happening in those classrooms. And since we're on the topic, I do want to say that I've heard from several autistic support classroom affected parents, as I do with all of our parents. A lot of people, reach out to my office, and I've heard nothing but positive feedback. People have, and sometimes we tend to only get calls when something's wrong or someone wants to change. This is one of those times where every phone call I've received about this transition has been absolutely supportive of our new supervisor, Dr. Gallagher's work, the classroom, just the level of care and integration and inclusion of the students. So I have heard anecdotally some of that feedback, but you will, as a board, continue to receive updates in the biweekly board updates. And one of the reasons why we had this presentation in February is we really want to give you some good feedback on what's happening. Not the beginning of the year, not when we want to really give it a chance to really work and to work out some of the things that we may see that are going well, or some of the things that may need to be updated. And we felt like February will be a good halfway point to really express and have enough time to collect parent feedback, also teacher and staff feedback, and also from our SEEK group to speak to them before this meeting as well, so that this presentation isn't something that's just coming from our office, but we would have an opportunity to vet through a few of our stakeholders. So as Dr. Scriven said, I'll be working with him to make sure that you do get regular updates. And if he believes that something requires an ed affairs topic sooner than this, that was my disclaimer in the very beginning. We'll just add it where we see that is necessary.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Epps? No, Ms. Henry.
As in terms of communication for the public also, is it possible to post agendas along with just the topics? Because, for example, when I look at the December meeting, it's going to be calendared. It's going to be 3 different topics. Is it possible to have like high level so people know what to expect or what's going to be covered in those sessions? And I know sometimes that's subject to change. It doesn't necessarily be an overview, but just like these are the things that are going to be covered in there.
I think what I'll do is Ed Affairs is normally always after our legislative meeting.
Right.
So I can designate a slide during my superintendent report
That's probably a good idea.
that would speak to the topics of the
For the
upcoming
next,
ed
yeah,
fair.
that would be good, because I know sometimes things are not finalized, but I think that would be helpful for the benefit of, you know, the community to know what's going to be discussed there. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Mr. X.
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Smith. Wanted to note appreciation for the synergy that I noticed in the schedule. For example, and I'm looking ahead a little bit in the presentation. So for example, there's a PD around the mid-tri data review on October 12th, and then we'll be talking about the school improvement plans on the 13th. There's a trauma-informed practices in January, and then we come to talk about social emotional. And so I appreciate that synergy. And then at the end, we can hear about like what happened over the year at the same time that we're making decisions about the budget and what investments are important. And so that just stood out to me. And so I appreciate that because I'm sure that is not by mistake. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Do we have any questions from the public, whether they are in the Zoom room or in the room? I'm not hearing anything. Is Mr. Kaufman?
We have one hand raised. Hang on just 1 second, please. Mic is open.
Thank you.
Hi.
My name is
Yeah.
Aisha. I'm new to this community. We just moved last year. I have a son who's autistic in Elkins Park. Last Thursday, we had a meeting, parents meeting, and I noticed there was no supply to supplement this kids, all the 6 kids that is in that classroom. There was no computer, no sensory area. I was told the sensory room was closed because they don't have a key. The previous, I'm assuming it's the IU, the people who was running has the key, and they have taken all the supplies. My son has a behavioral issue, and he's been having a behavior problem since he came to the school, which is 3 weeks, and he's been complaining that he doesn't want to go to school. He has the first week of my son has been there. He came home with different behavior that I have never seen, kicking. And I spoke to Dr. Clark. I spoke to Ms. Tracy Lunk, and they've been very helpful, but I need to address, and it should be some kind of resolution to this. I know I have an IEP meeting this Friday, but I want to know who's supposed to supplement these sensory rooms and pads and the support that he needs. He's supposed to have one-on-one. It's been 3 weeks, he doesn't have any. Who's supposed to help him?
So I can go ahead and answer that. This is Dr. Scriven. Good evening, and how are you?
Thank you. Good.
Can you just state your location in the township, just so we have it on the record, please, ma'am?
I live in Montgomery County, Elkins Park Township. My son goes to Elkins Park Middle School, 5th grader.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Scriven.
You're welcome.
So this just came to my attention at 6:06 this evening from our SEEK partnership. I've had the opportunity to share the concerns with both Dr. Gallagher and Dr. Smith, as this is new information for them as well. Our team will be following up with Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark should be aware because, as you alluded to, you've had dialogue already. And we will contact you prior to Friday's IEP meeting with the next steps in terms of addressing your concerns.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that you can see, Mr. Kaufman?
Ms. Mulhern, no other questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Smith, and everyone who helped prepare that presentation. As Mr. Epps stated, I think it really does show a lot of communication and cooperation together to get us to this point where we can have a pretty impressive document, I think, that really lays out the year for all of us. So thank you to all of you. We will move on to the next presentation, Mr. Pimentel.
Okay. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
It's nice to see some of you in the flesh for the first time in a couple years, which is kind of strange to say. And some of you seeing you for the first time. So glad to be here, and thanks for the invite. So our topic, which has already been mentioned, is this topic of bi-monthly early dismissal professional learning days. Just to clarify, because I did have to check in Webster's dictionary, the term bi-monthly is tricky because it can mean once every other month or it can mean twice a month. So in this case, it does mean twice a month, and bi-weekly does not help you if you change to that word. So I did my research on that before titling it. So we are talking about something that would happen twice a month, and that's what we mean by the term in this particular case. And as Dr. Smith always likes to start our presentations out with, this is all in line with our mission and vision statements. So for starters, the why here. For those who might not be familiar, there's a series of educational research that generally gets termed as visible learning. And that's kind of the catchphrase for it. And what it really is a group of academics who do meta-analyses of meta-analyses, which means that they're looking at, in some cases, tens of thousands of research articles when trying to determine effectiveness around certain educational strategies, leadership approaches, etc., so that we can make broad claims about what does or doesn't work in education. And everyone knows that that's one of the big challenges in education, which is that it feels like it's anachronistic and that you can't say anything certain. The research behind visible learning helps clarify some things that we can say with certainty about what does and doesn't work. So the number one thing everyone wants to know, okay, so then what is the best thing? Like, let's start at the top of the list and start working down from there. So the number one thing is something that research collectively terms collective teacher efficacy. So if there's any one thing that you can do for students, it's to build collective teacher efficacy. And what that phrase means is that all of the teachers in a building have a shared belief that students can learn, which seems like a pretty simple thing. But it can be a very hard thing to actually build in practice. And so if we can instill that in our staff and in our schools, that is the single biggest lever we can pull to try to make improvements around growth and learning and performance in our schools. And so that's kind of the essential lever as we start to move through the rest of this presentation. Why are we making this proposition to you, or this proposal? The answer is that this is in line with trying to create the conditions necessary that we can create collective teacher efficacy. And that is the big why for everything that sort of comes forward from this point forward in the presentation. How we would see this happening, or how we would try to bring these opportunities for collective teacher efficacy into place, as all of you, or most of you, were there with us as we traveled through the torrential waters of COVID-19. One of the things that we learned from that, for those who recall, our teaching schedules on those days had asynchronous days on Wednesdays. And the purpose of that was in order to be able to have that time to come back with staff to try to sort of circle the wagon, so to speak. And one of the things that we learned through that experience was that there was growth that we were able to make as an institution that we could not have dreamed of making under other circumstances. In some sense, we grew more over the pandemic than we would have under normal circumstances. And that was due to that time that we had to actually connect with staff on a weekly basis. And it really helped us implement certain big shifts that we made. For example, Dr. Smith brought in the Wonders program for the elementary literacy programming. The amount of time that we were able to spend with teachers to help support them in the actual implementation of that program, there's no comparing that to what we had pre-pandemic, where we would say, okay, we have an in-service day in October and then another one in November, and then we'll see you all in February. To be able to sit every week and say, okay, here's another in-service opportunity. And we got to the point where we were able to say, okay, for those teachers who feel really confident about what they're doing, use this time to plan your lessons. For those who still want more time, we have someone from Wonders on the line who is going to set up a Zoom meeting that is just a wide open, basically an office hours, and people can just jump in and get the support that they would need. That's an example of something that we just couldn't do if we didn't have the time on the calendar, so to speak. The other thing about this idea of having this time is that if you look at the schools that are making the greatest growth, particularly our neighbors at some of the more successful charter schools in Philadelphia and other places that are really growth focused and trying to make gains around their educational performance, they are utilizing, in some cases, every Wednesday as a half in-service day for the purposes of making sure there's time with staff. And so if we're kind of looking at it from that angle, there's a precedence for those schools that are making the most growth have already gone down this road. Now, if you compare us to very high-performing districts, they may not have made this shift yet, but that's because they may not see the need when they're looking at their own performance data. But for those who see a need for growth, this is a shift that a lot of other institutions have already made. So specifically, the proposal is that every other Wednesday will be an early dismissal. This time will be utilized for the purposes of ongoing professional development, guided collaboration with teachers, and review of action plans and student data, which we'll also get into in just a moment. So some examples of program support. I already used the Wonders example as an expression of this. Wonders is one of a dozen of them that we're able to support during COVID-19 specifically as a way to try to help our teachers' ability to utilize the resources that we already have in district that we're already paying for. And something that is interesting, by the way, is a lot of these programs that we have tons of resources available to them. But if you don't have time to access it, then even though it's a resource that is covered by the funds that we pay to have the program, if you don't have time to have teachers actually access those resources, they're not necessarily getting utilized, or they are in a kind of a la carte way, but not in a more guided methodology. So that's an example of program support that we can provide. And then the other piece is, as we start to get more and more focused around our use of student data as a means to adjust instruction and the way that we meet student needs. And I think that this is, although the district has been moving in this direction for a couple of years, with Dr. Scriven here and his particular professional background, we're really poised to take advantage of this shift. So sort of two pieces to this. The left-hand graph, this is like a generic example, not like Cheltenham's specific model, but it gives you an idea of sort of a way of conceptualizing how ongoing professional development for the use of data and data analysis would be used in a sort of cyclical program. And if we knew that we had that time on the clock, so to speak, you can pre-plan how you're going to use that time, coordinated when we pull benchmark data and when we have PSSA data that becomes available, course grades at the end of report periods, et cetera, in order to be able to run those data analyses in a sort of pre-planned way. What you see on the right-hand side here is actually an expression of how we're already doing this in a sort of limited way, and that we would be able to sort of put this on steroids, so to speak. So as you all know, we moved from, there's different ways to term it, but we increased the size of our current once per month Wednesday dismissal days. And that gave us an extra hour with staff. And so what you see here is that we've already planned the whole year out around teacher analysis of student data. And that's based on, the reason why it's split by elementary and secondary is that elementary is on trimesters and secondary is on report periods, 4 per year. And so the way that their calendar jockeys is a little bit different. So we've organized it so that it coincides with when teachers are getting new data sets. Now keep in mind what you're seeing here is like an hour. of time. So if we have every other Wednesday, now you're starting to talk about review of data and to be able to start to implement more a clear connection between that data analysis and instructional practice. So we're already doing this, but we want to be able to do it more in order to be able to make these shifts and changes in the classroom.
I know we're not asking questions yet, but what does BOY mean and what does CDT mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. And this is, so just for full disclosure, I'm glad you asked that question. This is my own internal document and I screenshot it. And because I was moving so fast, I didn't think to clarify that. So that's beginning of year data review.
I knew it wasn't boy.
Yes, sorry. I'm glad you asked the question.
I don't see girl data.
I'm glad you asked the question. Yeah, that's beginning of year data review. So that would be a teacher looking at their particular student set,
Right.
but going back and looking at the data that they have from the previous school year on that group of kids. So that's what that represents. And there may, maybe Dr. Riley can confirm on, that would also include benchmark 1. Correct. Okay. So we'd also have benchmark 1 in there. And then the CDT is the Pennsylvania Computer Adaptive Test that we utilize as our benchmark in grades 2 through 12. It doesn't go into kindergarten, first grade. And that, for those who aren't aware, basically Pennsylvania offers to school districts a free computer adaptive test. And what that allows us to do is to give a student the test, and the test will match the student's skill ability regardless of their actual grade. So if a student is in 7th grade and they're consistently getting questions wrong, the test will bring the questions down to a lower grade level until the student sort of flattens out in terms of their questions that get right. And we can say, oh, this student's at a 5th grade level, even though they're a 7th grade student. Mm-hmm. Or if the student is a high performer, it'll start bumping up the rigor on those questions. And we can say this student's at an 11th grade level, even though they're in 7th grade. So the adaptiveness gives us a really wide range of student performance as opposed to a grade level test where for your high performers, it'll just say, oh, they're maxing it out, but you don't know where they wind up. And obviously from a gifted lens, we look on that side of it. If you're worried about students who are underperforming, we can tell you right where they're at. So that's our benchmark test, and that's what we see there.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Useful question.
So some other considerations, we worked with the transportation department to say, what would this mean if we were doing this every other Wednesday? The long and short of it is that it just wouldn't have much of an impact. We already do early dismissal. The buses will run just fine. It won't be an issue. Facilities, it's the same thing. They'll utilize their same staffing that they do on early dismissal Wednesdays now. They'll just increase that. It'll be financially neutral and won't have a discernible effect. So I know when we have brought this issue up before, the big question is the cost to families and what this is going to mean, because of course early dismissal is challenging for anybody who has children. I can speak directly. I put a 4-year-old to bed before I got here tonight, so I can speak to the challenges of trying to juggle those things. So the program, Right at School, which is what we use now for after-school programming, they can offer the after-school programming for students on the early dismissal days, which they do now. The projected monthly cost would be $23 per Wednesday. That's for students right now with what we have, that's what it is. And then it would just be obviously double that because it'd be 2 Wednesdays per month. So that would be $46 per month for families utilizing that service. However, there is, I just learned this this afternoon, which is that one addendum to that is that the families who utilize the Right to the Right at School program as a monthly bill, that they're using it every day, actually there'd be no increase in cost because it would just be rolled into their current programming. So those people would not see any additional cost. It would just be for the people who only use the Wednesdays would they see an increase. And of course, I have to put note, the price is subject to annual price adjustments. As we all know, inflation is in the news every other day and all of those kinds of things. But as of right now, this is the pricing for what that would look like. So our next steps would be to reconvene a calendar meeting because this is a change to the calendar. So we'd have to make an addendum is something we would have to do. And then another piece on our next steps is to conduct a larger community survey to get this information out to the community, to get community voices back in order to incorporate that into the larger decision-making process. And so that's would be coming on the heels of this discussion. And that concludes our presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Pimentel. Do we have any board questions? Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, and very exciting to see. I know that in our strategic planning committee meeting, there was some commentary about from a building administrator about how exciting it is to be able to have access to a more robust professional development schedule. I have questions around the cost side of things for the families, and I really appreciate the transparency and sort of the breakdown of what those costs would be. And I did some like back of the napkin math to try to map out, in particular from an equity lens for our families who might be on free and reduced lunch. And the cutoffs for free and reduced lunch, as far as I'm understanding, is $22,000 annual salary for a family of 2. So it's along those lines, which would be $10 an hour. These costs would represent, for a person working minimum wage, like 3.5 hours of work per Wednesday. And I assume that the families that would be taking advantage of, that would need childcare are probably, is it K through 6 that it's offered for? Or is it, what is the grade range that would utilize?
I believe it's K to 6.
K to 6. So roughly, for, we're talking about over 18 early dismissal days for the total, cost. I know not everyone's taking advantage utilizing it, but it would be total, let's say 2,000 students, K through 6 roughly. We're talking around $720,000 of cost that is kind of being passed to our families through this change. Not invoked, but that's the cost. Not everyone's going to pay that in terms of out of pocket, but they need to find childcare, and that's what childcare is worth. I know a lot of our families can absorb that, but for somebody who is earning $33,000 a year, that represents $414 a year, and that's about a 1.25% income tax that we are now, with this change, kind of applying to those families. All that is to say, this is all based on hypotheticals. I don't know what the actual impact is. So when here's the meat of my question / point. When we do that survey, I think it would be very helpful to understand how are families planning to cover their childcare need, and be able to sort of disaggregate in terms of free and reduced lunch versus not. So we can see, all right, families are largely not planning on paying the $23 a month, and they're going to be able to cover it with family members or whatever it might be. I think that will help put some real numbers down, not to challenge the idea of doing it, but to think about, from an equity lens, do we need to allocate resources to help offset these costs? So I don't know if this all makes sense, but that's kind of where I'm getting at. I think it'd be good to make an informed decision on, hey, this is important, and it does come with a cost, and we believe it's so important we are going to help pay for half of a free and reduced, for free and reduced lunch families, try to cover, maybe cut that number down from 23 to 13.
It's 46 because it's twice.
Right, yeah. Right, yeah. Sorry, I threw out a whole bunch of numbers. I know none of it really made sense. The point is, there's numbers to be analyzed, and it would be great to be able to analyze.
And I think if in the survey we would ask for student ID numbers.
Okay.
And that would, so then we'd be able to cross-reference it with our own spreadsheets, and that would give us very accurate information about how those would be impacted.
Understood. Wonderful. Yeah. So bottom line is, once the survey is conducted, being able to answer that question of how many of our families and under what circumstances will likely be paying these things. Thanks. That's my question. And thank you very much.
So Dan, were you trying to say most of us aren't smart enough to follow your math?
I barely could
I'm just saying.
I think it made perfect sense, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you.
I think we all followed it pretty well, and it seems,
You were picking out what you were putting down.
reading the room, it seems many of us would agree with the sentiment to get, some of those particulars so that we can all make an informed decision. So thank you for raising that. Mr. Cohen, I think you were next.
Yes, one question and one comment. What's the rough or proposed timetable for starting this program if everything goes well and goes forward?
Yesterday.
Great.
The 23-24 school year. And we hope to have a final decision on this portion of the calendar, as we'll be asking for the 23-24 and 24-25 calendars to be approved in December. So we're hoping to bring the formal proposal in December for a August of 23 start.
Okay, thank you. And the second is on slide 20, there's a little confusion in my mind. It says every other Wednesday, and you mentioned twice a month. So obviously there can be 5 Wednesdays in a month. So that's a question, I guess, for clarification purposes. And then I think it would just be easier, logistically, if it works, it'd be easier, I think, for parents to follow and some level of assuredness in scheduling. If it could be, let's say, the first and third Wednesday or second and fourth Wednesday or something of that sort, just to lessen confusion or ambiguity or uncertainty about when exactly this is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. I had the same note about whether it was really bi-monthly or every other week, since they're not quite the same thing. So being very explicitly clear to our families what we're talking about.
And you can map that out in the calendar.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just think in terms of the way we talk about it, every other week is not necessarily the same
Sure.
as bi-monthly. So, but no, hopefully, yeah, we'll be on that calendar and it will be all very clear.
You'd also just have to take into depending on when you schedule it out. If you were going to do, for example, every other week, Wednesdays where it also might fall on a holiday. With school.
Absolutely, yeah. Right, so each year will be a little bit
different.
Any other questions, Mr. Epps?
Just appreciate the presentation and just your zeal and passion for this as well. It definitely shows, even through Zoom. Appreciate it. You kind of already answered it. It seemed like the PD schedule was a window into like more of that comprehensive measurement standards and processes that's been developing. You mentioned something of the collective teacher efficacy, and part of that is the impact of culture, intercultural awareness, understanding, and other things that go beyond student performance data. And so could you share some of the alignment of like this type of professional development and the intercultural professional development? Because I see those two things as critical if we're really actually going to shift teacher advocacy.
So on the cultural end of the spectrum, so several years ago was when we had that as the front-loaded professional development. So our in-service days were focused on cultural proficiency and equity as the specific approach. And what we've done since then is moved that into the buildings so that it's incorporated into what happens at the building in the classroom, and trying to very purposefully get away from it as a kind of stand and deliver sort of professional development and get it to be something that is integrated into the instruction and classroom experience. So that's where we as a district are in terms of that. So in terms of like direct instruction pieces of it, we've sort of moved to the next phase, you could say. Now already our cultural proficiency cadre is slated out during staff meetings over the course of the year to present at the building level. And so that would be incorporated as part of these times. It's already there, actually.
I appreciate that, because some of that predates my time on the board. And so that context is important. And if there's somewhere to kind of learn what were like some of those main takeaways, what is actually some examples of what the opportunities to translate, not right now, but as that develops, I would certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Learning that, continuing to be very intentional about that synergy. Another, just last question. You also mentioned seeing the need to develop. And so could you share a little bit about what leads to someone or a teacher seeing the need to develop?
So in the context of this broader conversation, I think it's the difference between if you're, in our area, I'm trying to think of the best example. If you're, Treff and Easttown, which is typically either number 1 or number 2 in the state in terms of overall performance, the difference between them being number one and number two is literally like 3 kids not coming to school on the PSSA day who would have scored better. Like they're down to they're down to that kind of difference in those schools that are at that overall performance level. And so their focus is very different. If you're talking about classrooms and a school district overall that is seeing the need for growth in their student body, that's a different need and requires a different approach. And so that's where our time to be able to analyze and look at data with a particular growth model view is helpful.
So it's less about an individual seeing the need to develop and more about like
Well, it's all the above.
Oh, all of the above. Okay.
It's all the above, yes. Yeah.
And it's the PLC process.
And the okay, that's all. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Epps. Ms. Haywood?
Yes, kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Epps was asking. As part of the teacher collaboration during those every other Wednesday meetings, you said, Mr. Pimentel, that teachers would also be looking at data, the student performance data. How does that again dovetail with the PLCs? Is there an opportunity for the teachers to get together at PLC to really, unpack the data? And is there a opportunity for someone who's got a social emotional component to be part of that discussion, which may inform some of those conversations?
So I think there's a couple of pieces of that. So a lot of what you're mentioning is part of the PLC process specifically. What this time around data review is oriented around are those times on the schedule where we know we've got this new cache of data and that we need a new and renewed focus on, okay, what just came down, what just showed up that we now need to look and see what shifts we need to make. It's very purposeful time for that specific adjustment that happens. Whereas part of what you're talking about is what's naturally integrated into the PLC process. I think that's kind of one way to answer the question.
And the second part is something that Dr. Smith, Ms. Keene, and others in their department are really working on our MTSS process as well, which is a part of that social.
What does that happen?
Emotional, the multi-tiered system support.
I heard that about 500 times.
Really based on, it's tied together because you're really looking at your early warning indicators as well as academic outcomes to make sure that the resources and interventions needed based on what the data is telling you are in place for students in more of a differentiated way.
And then is there kind of any vertical alignment in the evaluation of the data so that we're not just looking at kind of where students are today and, then growing from one point to another, but also what they're expected to be learning a year from now?
Yeah, and so Dr. Raleigh and who's your partner? Is it Ms. Collins? Are the co-chairs for teaching and learning. They'll be having their first meeting, I believe, tomorrow. Ms. Mulhern and Ms. Henry will be a part of that. And really tied into Portrait of a Graduate and some of the work that they're doing, we're looking at what are the standards that students should meet as they're matriculating through grades. So that's that vertical alignment that you're referencing, where we know what are the key metrics that we're using to measure students' growth towards target.
Great, thank you. And my last question, which I'm sure has already been figured out, every other Wednesday, great to be able to do that. I'm sure we're meeting the 180-day requirement.
Yes, yeah, the early dismissal does not take away from the 180-day requirement. It fits into what the state allows to be considered a full day of school.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haywood.
I just have an observation, no questions. We have, since I've been on the board, I'm in, I think, my 7th year, if my math is correct. We have always talked about using the data to determine how we're doing and to get better. Since I've been on the board, I don't feel like we've had a handle on that. We don't see measurable improvements that we expect, that we want, that we plan for, then they don't happen. This presentation gives me some real hope where the processes that you're talking about putting in place will give us the ability to measure and remeasure and then adjust in that circular graph. Very hopeful. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you all for putting this as a priority, because it's one of our greatest frustrations as board members is to not see that, to want it and to keep asking for it and to not feel like there's a good plan for how to get there. Now that feels different tonight.
I think it's worth just adding to that, just as sort of how we've gotten to this place. A lot of it, there's been a tremendous amount of work that's had to happen over these years in order to get things poised for this. And that's largely through Dr. Smith's leadership around the shifts that we've made with the schedules, and also some of the shifts around the contract language. Those things had to happen in order to set the stage, in order to be able to even be structurally ready to do these things. And that's, largely from Dr. Smith and Ms. Collins and their work about trying to prime the pump to get all this
No, and I
so this could possibly happen.
You credit for
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I know the way it came across, I'm like, I'm not the guy.
Not for a second.
I'm the PD guy.
No, not at all. Just the way that you presented what the team is going to be doing suggests to me collectively it's happening in a way that maybe not before. Sorry, I didn't mean to all the people who are teaching deserve all the credit. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fishbein. Any other board questions? Julie, or Ms.
Really
Haley?
good question, Jess. I do like how you started, that the purpose of this is having a shared, and I think it's really get to that point. We need to get to that point, that we all have a shared belief, and I go back to the conversation that I had with Dr. Scriven a while back, and probably everybody knows this story, that somebody went to NASA one day and asked somebody who was a custodian, and they didn't know what he was doing. They said, "What's your job?" He said, "My job is to get me on the moon." And that's collectively everyone's job here. That shared belief is so important.
Just a quick comment for me. I'm not looking for an answer per se, but just as we think about this, we, until just 3 weeks ago, last week was our first early dismissal with the new time with this extra hour. Previously we were still once a month with just an hour, right? Or not even. And now if we, hopefully next year move to every other or twice a month, whatever, for the 2 hours, I guess I'm curious what the effect it has on, our staff members and our teachers who coach or are dealing with clubs and things like that. Clubs are easy. Some clubs only meet every other week, or you just don't meet on Wednesdays because that'll be a harder day. But I'm thinking about, that I can think of my kids' coaches all teach a class as well. And so, have a full slate. So when, just kind of to be aware of what the plan will be for those teachers and staff who clearly also need to do this PD. They need to be doing the work and the data for their students. But also, athletics and co-curricular activities are important, or curricular activities, and don't want to lose anything there. So just kind of throwing that out there is something to be aware of.
I think Dr. Smith has her hand raised.
I noticed that as well. Dr. Smith?
So you started off by making the point that I wanted to make, that we have started the earlier schedule this year. We will be collecting data from our families to see how the transition has gone. That will be a key part of our proposal in December when we present the final schedule. And I'm sure the calendar committee is also going to ask me how the new schedule has worked for our families. So we do have plans to do that. And I also wanted to say that with the days that our teachers have this additional half day, they still leave at the same time, at the same dismissal time. So to your point, Ms. Mulhorn, it would impact any after school programming that may happen on those days that may need to shift, but it would not require our teachers to stay later than the normal school day. And that's one of the things I do want to mention is that prior to making that change, myself and members of the Office of Education had a few conversations and a few collaborative meetings with CEA, and they were really open and gave us some suggestions also about moving forward as well. So it was something that was done with our union leadership, as well as the Office of Education, knowing that we were going to come back and ask for more time for next year, but this was kind of a pilot.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Mr. Epps?
Yeah, just one last point, and not to belabor, because I have this written down. Tonight, Dr. Smith earlier talked about like the importance of having the ATSI presentation, but also the timing of it, right? And if we're going to think about an exit strategy, now's the time that we need to be thinking about it. Mr. Pimental talked about wonders. And if we are going to use data in a way that links to student need, we can see if a fifth grader is at 11th grade level, or at a seventh grade, at a fifth grade level, we absolutely need wonders. And so that level of clarity, I'm bringing it back to the budget, that level of clarity is needed as we get to making decisions about what we're investing in. If we're hearing, look, we need this because it's going to lead to X, therefore we must invest in wonders, right? And so that type of clarity is appreciated, but also it's needed for us, myself as a board member, but also as community members, just understanding how our dollars are leading to supporting students and those that support those students.
That's actually the significance of us needing to have our strategic plan done prior to starting our budget process. Moving forward, as was done in the past, you will see the alignment based on strategic plan goals to budgetary items, but to also presentations that we do is going to say that this is aligned to X, Y, and Z in the strategic plan. And that's why it's so paramount that we have a robust plan, which we know we're not going to accomplish in 1 year. And that's why it's a plan over years. But it's to make sure that resources are aligned based on the needs that we've identified. So that's the direction that we are currently moving.
I can feel
it. Thank you, Mr. Epps and Dr. Scrivens. If there's no other board comments at this time, are there any comments from the public? I don't know.
Q&A's been bothering me.
There are none.
Okay.
What's in the Q&A, Kevin?
Would you like me to read them?
Can we click on
If they're relevant.
Questions and relevant.
I think it's like, hey, we have a prepare.
Okay, Enid Banton asks, is there a list of all equity PD that can be provided to the public? And then she makes a clarification that can be shared with the public.
So I can jump in and answer that. The strategic plan, I don't know where, group committee, the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. We had our committee meeting today. We have a draft of our plan that we will present for Friday. And just as a preview, one of our strategic goals or strategies is to make sure that we go on a full-blown marketing campaign. Sorry, Mr. Kaufman, you're hearing about it right now. I was going to talk to you. We are going to go on a full-blown marketing campaign and promotion to make sure that all of our community members are aware of the board's adopted equity policy and all of the training, professional learning, so on and so forth that will go along with that. We are not only looking for training and professional development to present to our staff, teachers, and students, but also to our families and our community members. So the timeline for that is upon approval of the strategic plan.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
There is one more question from Enid Banton. PLC and data-driven instruction are quite specialized practices. Is there a plan to educate the board on what it is and how it should operate so that when the board is given data-driven reports, they readily understand what is being presented? Those are all the key.
Yes. We have a board retreat coming up that will be part of our dialogue, and there will be ongoing opportunities to unpack that for the board.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven. And Ms. Banton, if you could please leave your location in the Q&A, that would be helpful. Thank you for your questions. We have a question from Mr. Taylor.
More of a comment.
For a comment?
So I'm Jim Taylor, I'm a resident of Ellis Park, but I have my administrative hat on tonight. I just want to speak to that. The gift of time. So we often hear in education, we're being asked to do all this, but where's the time to do it, right? And so in the last week, with that extra hour, the richness of the conversation that the faculty at Lincoln had around data allows people to become more and more comfortable with it. And it's not that we're superimposing something else on them to do. We're giving them the space in the arena in which to do it. So to double that time doubles the depth and the richness of that conversation, which then translated to our team meetings this week. And today's only Tuesday, but we've had several already this week. Which allowed us to really take that broad conversation and drill it down to the team level. And then, to your point, Ms. Haywood, to the student level. And look at what sort of PBIS data we have on these students to get a more holistic picture rather than just numbers in a range. So, and I know this is stealing my thunder for next month's presentation, but we're very intentional, at least at Wyncote, about looking at the whole student. And that additional timing allows us to do that in a meaningful way. So I want to put my 2 cents in for doubling that time.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board or from anyone listening via Zoom?
I have a follow-up from Ms. Banton. Ms. Banton, if you would like to just have the mic open, could you raise your hand? You could ask your question directly. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman.
Mic is open. You're welcome.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, the follow-up question was the initial question was to follow up, I think, what Matt mentioned in answer to one of the other board members' question, that equity was being conducted in the buildings and in the classrooms. And so I just didn't know to what you were referring, that's all. So I thought it would be more efficient if there was a list of what teachers, what PD is put together for teachers to take over the course of the school year. And whatever that building or classroom activity you were describing should be included on that list.
Duly noted. And I don't want to jump in. I mean, it was directed for a comment that Matt made, but part of the work that we're currently doing that Dr. Smith alluded to with diversity, equity, and inclusion is really going to highlight what our plan forward is going to look like. Some of the things that I know Matt was alluding to was past professional development that has occurred. I'm sure he can list that out, and then what were the outcomes, and then as a result of those outcomes, what we would expect to see while we're going in to do informal and formal observations. So you kind of have two parallel tracks going. You have a track of work which has happened and a toolkit which teachers should have right now, current, that they're implementing, which we can put into context for you. But then you have a plan which is being developed with even more updated data from multiple perspectives, which is helping us chart the course of what it's going to look like over the next 1 to 3 years. So I hope that helps.
Oh, that was fantastic. In fact, let me just jump to the point, right? In the past, PD has been offered, but teachers were calling out sick. So, you know, I hope that, you know, there's a turn in that regard, that teachers are committed to, you know, engaging around this kind of PD, and that you have some levers to make sure teachers are taking it seriously and engaging in it.
So
It
that's
makes me nervous that it's being pushed to buildings and classrooms, because I'm like, wait a minute, they weren't real happy about it when it was centralized.
And so if Mr. Taylor was a part of our strategic plan group, we're on the same team. And we had a very spirited discussion about that today with parents, administrators, teachers, and students on the call. And so I think Ms. Banton, when you see the finalized version of the strategic plan, you will see what you're asking for, because one of the things that the template is asking us to do is what are our barriers to this work? What may interfere? And one of the things we did say was mindset, commitment, and getting people to really, you know, do the work, even, you know, whether their heart is in it or not. We're moving towards getting their heart in it, but what do we do in the meantime? So we did take that into consideration. Another one of our barriers was time and scheduling. So we are very well aware of that, and so we've been working through what that could look like. And I would just say that once we put out the draft, or once we continue the strategic planning process, to keep an eye on that, and then you can reach out to me or anyone on that committee to let us know if we're not capturing what you're describing, because we did talk about that today, how, you know, some people did it because they had to, some people decided to sidestep it. How can we really make this a concerted effort and not to let people, quote unquote, off the hook, so to speak, which is why we're starting off with this big campaign to remind people about what we say we're committed to as a district, and then to hold us accountable to do so. And that was the comment that the student made. What will be the accountability? How will we make sure that this reaches everyone? And so that was a part of our discussion today. We have it all written up as a draft. I'm just giving people a few moments to review it before we submit, but we are thinking along the same lines that you're thinking as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you, Ms. Banton, for your question. We appreciate it. Any other questions? All right.
There are none.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kaufman. If there are no other questions, I would remind everyone that our next Educational Affairs meeting is Tuesday, October 13th at 7 p.m. right here in the Administration Building, or also via Zoom. As we learned this evening, we have our agenda. We will be discussing school improvement plans. Our building principals and the Office of Education will be presenting to us. I would expect it to be a longer meeting, given we'll be hearing from all 7 principals, which is a great opportunity for all of us. If there are no other questions, thank you again to Dr. Smith and the Office of Education, and to Mr. Pimentel for your presentations and all of that hard work that went into them. We do appreciate it and look forward to moving forward. And I will take a motion to adjourn. So moved. So Ms. Henry, second.
Second, Zachary Epps.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.